The evening air in Bandar Seri Begawan was warm and still. The river reflected the golden lights of the Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque, casting a shimmering glow across the water. Hafiz stood in his small flat not far from the city center, staring into the mirror. The face that looked back at him was one he had known for 28 years, yet something about it felt distant. His jawline was the same, his eyes were the same dark brown, but the light within them seemed dimmed. He lifted his hand, brushing his hair back, and tried to summon the smile he used to wear so easily. It appeared, but it felt hollow, like an actor rehearsing lines for a role he no longer believed in. Once, Hafiz had been a dreamer. He wrote poems in Malay, sat by the riverside with a notebook, and let his thoughts flow like the tide. He remembered nights when he stayed awake until dawn, creating verses that spoke of hope, love, and freedom. But that was before the long hours at the oil company, before deadlines became more important than dreams, before every decision was measured by salary slips and promotions. He leaned closer to the mirror, his breath fogging the glass. And in a whisper that only the walls could hear, he asked himself, "When did I become someone I do not recognize?" The silence that followed was heavier than words. Hafiz turned away, stepping to the window. Outside, the city glowed with progress, but inside him, there was only a growing emptiness. The following weekend, Hafiz walked along the banks of the Brunei River. The water moved slowly, carrying small fishing boats and the reflection of Kampong Air, the village on stilts that stretched across the river. He remembered when he was a teenager, sitting in the same spot with his father, listening to stories of their ancestors who once lived in those wooden houses. Back then, the river was a place of inspiration, a companion to his poetry. Now it was silent. The notebook he once carried was long forgotten, buried under years of unread documents in a drawer. He sat on a stone bench, staring at the dark water, hoping that perhaps a line of poetry might return to him. But his mind was empty. Children ran past him, laughing, their voices echoing across the river. Hafiz watched them disappear into the narrow walkways of Kampong Air. Something inside him longed for that simplicity, the pure joy of being alive without fear of failure or judgment. As the call to prayer rose from a nearby mosque, Hafiz closed his eyes. The sound was gentle, but it reminded him of how far he had drifted from his own soul. He opened his eyes again, and for a moment, he thought he saw his younger self across the river, sitting with a notebook, writing with passion. But when he blinked, the vision was gone. Back at work, Hafiz buried himself in endless meetings. Charts, numbers, and polished presentations filled his days. His colleagues praised him for his discipline, for his ability to deliver under pressure. Yet each compliment felt like a chain tightening around his chest. This was not the life he had dreamed of. At night, when the city grew quiet, Hafiz would sit alone in his apartment, staring at unfinished drafts on his laptop. Words that once poured effortlessly now felt heavy, refusing to form sentences. He typed, deleted, and typed again, but nothing carried the spark of the past. His ambition, once noble, now felt like a shadow that followed him everywhere. The more he chased success, the more he lost sight of who he truly was. One night, he found an old piece of paper hidden inside a book. It was a poem he had written years ago, about freedom and the courage to follow one's heart. Reading it again made his chest ache. He barely recognized the handwriting, as though it belonged to another man entirely. The question haunted him still. When did he become someone unrecognizable? Hafiz attended a company dinner at a hotel overlooking the sea. The room was filled with laughter, fine clothes, and the clinking of glasses. Everyone seemed alive, yet Hafiz felt invisible, as though he did not belong. A colleague placed a hand on his shoulder and said with admiration, "You are an inspiration, Hafiz. You have everything one could hope for." He smiled politely, but his eyes betrayed him. On the surface, he was successful. Inside, he was lost. Later that evening, he caught sight of himself in a large decorative mirror near the entrance. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes, they were the eyes of a stranger. He stood frozen, staring, until another guest brushed past him, breaking the spell. He turned away quickly, ashamed of how much the reflection unsettled him. That night, as he drove home through the quiet streets, he wondered if he could ever return to the man he once was. One rainy afternoon, while searching through an old drawer, Hafiz's fingers touched a worn leather notebook. Dust covered its surface, but the moment he opened it, the scent of old paper rushed back, carrying memories with it. Inside were fragments of poems, unfinished verses, and scribbled thoughts from years ago. Some pages were stained with coffee, others with hurried ink. He read line after line, his chest tightening. The words spoke of hope, of faith, of the beauty of the river, the sky, and the people he loved. They were raw, imperfect, but alive. Hafiz sat on the floor for hours, flipping through the pages. He could hear his younger self in every sentence, reminding him of who he used to be. For the first time in years, he picked up a pen. His hand trembled as he tried to write. The ink bled into the page, shaky at first, but then steadier. The words were not perfect, but they were his. And for a brief moment, he felt a spark return. The next day, Hafiz walked through the old market near Gadang. The air was filled with the smell of grilled sauté and the sound of vendors calling out to customers. It was a place he had not visited in years. As he passed through the narrow aisles, he saw a familiar stall selling books of Malay poetry. The vendor, an elderly man with kind eyes, recognized him at once. "You used to come here often," the man said softly. "You love to read these poems." Hafiz smiled faintly, embarrassed that the man remembered. He picked up a thin volume and opened it. The words inside were like whispers from another world, reminding him of evenings when he would recite verses to the river. He bought the book and tucked it under his arm. On the way home, he kept glancing at it, as though it were a key to something hidden deep inside him. That night, he read until his eyes grew heavy. The poems stirred something in him, a longing that he could no longer ignore. Sleep did not come easily. Hafiz tossed in his bed, the words from the poems circling his mind. In the stillness of night, he heard a voice inside him. It was not loud, but it was clear. "Return to the river." He sat up, heart racing. It sounded like his own voice, yet younger, braver. The words echoed again and again. In the heart of Amsterdam, where the canals glitter beneath the morning sun, lived a man named Hendrik van der Veen. Hendrik was known throughout the Jordan district for his modest cheese shop. The air in his little shop was filled with the scent of Gouda wheels and fresh bread delivered each dawn. Customers greeted him warmly, for Hendrik carried himself with the quiet pride of a man who had built his life through honesty and patient labor. Every evening, as the bells of Westerkerk tolled, Hendrik would lock his shop and stroll along the canal. The reflections of lanterns danced upon the water, and for a moment he believed he lived in the most peaceful city in the world. His family was small but close, and though money was never abundant, there was laughter at the dinner table and hope for tomorrow. At the heart of Hendrik's contentment was his friendship with Peter de Jong. Peter had been at his side since boyhood. They shared their first market stall together when they were barely men, and together they weathered the storms of competition that swept through the trading streets. To Hendrik, Peter was more than a friend. He was a brother. Yet, beneath the surface of Peter's laughter, there lay a hunger Hendrik could not see. A hunger for more than just shared success. A hunger that would soon carve a deep wound in Hendrik's life. One autumn morning, when the mist curled low over the canals and the barges drifted slowly past, Hendrik noticed subtle changes. Peter began asking curious questions about his secret recipes, about the farmers who supplied him with the finest milk, about the methods he used to mature his cheeses. Hendrik thought nothing of it, for trust was the foundation of their friendship. He spoke freely, never once imagining that every word he shared would one day be turned against him. Amsterdam carried on in its timeless rhythm. The bells, the bicycles, the chatter of traders in the markets, all concealed the quiet betrayal taking root. For Hendrik, the days still felt safe, but shadows had begun to stir in places he did not look. And so, while the city glistened with beauty, Hendrik's life, was about to enter a season of darkness he could not yet foresee. Winter descended upon Amsterdam, and with it came longer nights and the quiet hum of trade beneath gaslit streets. Hendrik van der Veen found himself busier than ever. Customers queued outside his shop, drawn by the reputation of his cheeses, rich and delicate, perfected over years of care. It was during these busy weeks that Peter de Jong grew distant. He visited Hendrik less, and when he did, his questions were sharper, his eyes calculating. Hendrik, blinded by loyalty, dismissed the unease. He told himself that Peter, too, was weary from the strain of commerce. But whispers spread across the markets. Hendrik heard from fellow traders that Peter had been seen with new suppliers, farmers who once worked only with him. He brushed the gossip aside. His heart resisted suspicion, for betrayal was unthinkable from a man he trusted as kin. Then came the letter. It arrived one cold morning, stamped with a seal unfamiliar to Hendrik. Inside was an invitation to a grand opening of a new cheese emporium, positioned boldly along one of the busiest canals. The name on the letter chilled Hendrik's blood. Peter de Jong. Hendrik stood frozen as he read. His friend, his confidant, had not merely copied his trade. He had stolen it. Every secret, every recipe, every connection Hendrik had shared in trust had been used to construct a rival empire. For the first time in his quiet life, Hendrik felt the sting of betrayal. Yet he did not rage. He did not storm the streets. He folded the letter, placed it in his coat, and walked home along the canal. The betrayal settled in his chest, heavy as a stone, but his silence was not weakness. It was the beginning of something far darker. The weeks that followed were cruel. Customers who once filled Hendrik's shop drifted to Peter's gleaming new emporium. The building towered above the market street, its windows glowing with warm light, its shelves lined with cheeses labeled as if they were treasures. Hendrik's loyal patrons whispered apologies as they left him behind. They could not resist the splendor, the variety, the prices Peter offered. Slowly, Hendrik's shop grew emptier, the laughter that once filled it replaced by silence. His family suffered. His wife tried to remain hopeful, encouraging him with gentle words, but Hendrik saw the worry in her eyes. His children asked why fewer people came, their innocent questions piercing him deeper than any rival could. As debts crept closer, Hendrik watched Peter thrive. The man who had once walked beside him now stood above him, proud and arrogant, basking in the glow of success stolen from Hendrik's very soul. Yet in Hendrik's quiet suffering, something stirred. His despair turned to determination, his grief to resolve. Each night, he walked the canals alone, the mist curling around him, whispering thoughts of justice. He had given Peter his trust, his knowledge, his friendship. In return, Peter had stripped him of everything. There, beneath the flickering lanterns, Hendrik began to plan. Not a petty retaliation, but something patient, something merciless, something that would ensure Peter de Jong paid dearly for every moment of Hendrik's fall. Spring arrived, and though flowers bloomed along the canal banks, Hendrik's heart remained frozen. He continued his trade in silence, selling what little he could, his humble shop a shadow of what it had once been. But behind that silence, Hendrik began to weave his design. He reconnected with old farmers, those Peter had lured away with promises of fortune. He visited them not as a trader, but as a friend, listening to their grievances. Many confessed they had grown weary of Peter's arrogance. Though his emporium flourished, his demands grew harsher, his payments delayed, his pride insufferable. Hendrik listened, nodding, offering small kindnesses, never revealing his intent. Slowly, he gathered whispers, truths hidden behind Peter's polished smile. Each secret was another stone laid upon the foundation of revenge. He kept his distance, watching as Peter's empire glittered brighter. But Hendrik knew the shine was hollow. Pride made Peter careless. Greed made him blind. And so Hendrik waited. Every betrayal he uncovered, every slight Peter delivered to those around him, became another thread in the net Hendrik was quietly spinning. The city of Amsterdam went about its business, oblivious. Yet in the quiet corners of the markets, a storm was forming. A storm that only Hendrik could see. By summer, Hendrik had become a ghost in Peter's world. He was no longer seen as a threat. Traders pitied him, neighbors shook their heads, and Peter himself often mocked him openly in the marketplace. But behind this facade of defeat, Hendrik tightened the web. He carefully nurtured alliances with merchants Peter had scorned. He offered honest words where Peter had offered deceit, loyalty where Peter had given only disdain. Bit by bit, Peter's allies drifted toward Hendrik. They did not yet know his plan, but they trusted the man they had once abandoned. At night, Hendrik kept notes by the dim glow of candlelight. Dates, names, debts unpaid, promises broken. He wrote them meticulously, each line a dagger he would one day plunge into Peter's empire. He spoke little to his family of his schemes, shielding them from the darkness he carried. Yet his wife saw the change. She noticed the coldness in his eyes, the long hours he spent walking the canals. Though she worried, she did not question him. She knew the fire that had once been crushed by betrayal was burning again, hotter than ever before. The city slept, but Hendrik remained awake. His revenge was no longer a thought. It was a living thing, growing stronger with every night. Autumn returned, and with it came the first signs of Peter's downfall. Traders began to whisper of unpaid debts, of farmers walking away from his contracts. His emporium, though still crowded, showed small fractures. The shelves were less abundant, the prices less stable. Peter dismissed these rumors with laughter. He told his customers he was untouchable, that his wealth would only grow. Yet Hendrik watched with quiet satisfaction as the cracks widened. One evening, Hendrik stood outside the emporium, hidden in the shadows of the canal. He watched Peter boast to wealthy patrons, his voice carrying through the night. The arrogance was unbearable, but Hendrik did not move. He simply observed, patient as ever. For Hendrik knew that revenge was not delivered in haste. It must be nurtured, shaped, and unleashed only when the enemy believed himself safe. And Peter, blinded by pride, had never felt safer. The second winter brought tension thick as fog across Amsterdam. Behind the glittering lights of Peter's emporium, chaos brewed. Suppliers abandoned him, shipments were delayed, customers whispered of inferior quality. Yet Peter refused to see the truth. He spent lavishly, hosted grand dinners along the canals, flaunting his supposed invincibility. Hendrik heard of these spectacles from afar, his resolve sharpening with every tale of Peter's indulgence. Meanwhile, Hendrik strengthened his alliances. Farmers once loyal to Peter now supplied Hendrik quietly, their wagons arriving under the cover of night. Hendrik's shop began to stir with life again, modestly at first, then steadily growing. But Hendrik did not seek to rebuild his fortune just yet. His goal was not simple survival. His goal was destruction. He stood often upon the bridges at night, the water black beneath him, imagining the moment when Peter's empire would crumble into the same darkness. The thought alone kept him warm in the bitter cold. The storm was ready. Only the strike remained. Spring blossomed once more, and with it came the unraveling of Peter's empire. A scandal spread through the market. Customers discovered that Peter's cheeses, advertised as rare and authentic, were counterfeit. Farmers he had mistreated came forward, their words carried across the city like wildfire. Peter raged against the rumors, but the truth was undeniable. Merchants turned their backs, patrons drifted away, and for the first time, his towering emporium seemed fragile. In the midst of this chaos, Hendrik remained silent. He did not need to expose Peter himself. The seeds he had sown, the alliances he had nurtured, bore fruit without his hand. Yet Hendrik's satisfaction was not complete. Peter still stood, weakened but unbroken. And Hendrik wanted more than weakness. He wanted ruin. The final blow came not from Hendrik's words, but from his patience. With every ally Peter lost, Hendrik gained strength. His shop once again thrived, a beacon of honesty and loyalty in contrast to Peter's crumbling empire. One evening, Hendrik arranged a gathering of traders in his modest shop. They spoke openly of Peter's arrogance, of his lies, of the debts he still owed. By dawn, a decision was made. Peter de Jong was to be cast out of the trading circles of Amsterdam. His name would no longer carry weight, his empire no longer tolerated. The next week, word spread across the city. Peter's emporium closed its doors. His fortune drained, his reputation shattered, his pride ground into dust. And Hendrik watched it all with the stillness of a man who had waited years for this moment. The canals of Amsterdam glittered once more beneath the evening sun. Hendrik stood upon the bridge, where years before he had first felt betrayal pierce his heart. Now he stood victorious, his enemy destroyed. Yet as the water flowed beneath him, Hendrik felt a hollowness he had not expected. Peter de Jong had lost everything, but Hendrik, too, had been changed. The warmth that once filled his shop, the laughter that once graced his home, felt distant. His family looked to him with pride, yet also with unease. They saw the shadows that lingered in his eyes, shadows carved by years of vengeance. Hendrik had won. He had brought Peter to ruin with patience and precision. But as he turned from the canal and walked back into the city, he carried with him the knowledge that revenge, no matter how just, leaves scars that never fade.